Coffee Connect today is February 18th, and we're going to talk about literacy skills within academic circles. So, kind of tying in those restorative practices to or integrating restorative practices within what we're already doing or what we might be looking to do into our system. We have a nice crew today presenting. We have a couple of guests, so we'll start with introductions. I'm Mackenzie. I'm a social or an integrated support specialist, and I serve Region 1, which is ESUs 4, 5, 6, and 18, the southeastern part of the state. And I will pass it to Jill.
Perfect. Thanks, Mackenzie. I'm Jill Gunther, Region 2 support lead, so serving ESUs 2, 3, and then Omaha Public Schools. And I will pass it to Amber.
I'm Amber Scott. The Integrated Support Specialist for Region 2, so Jill's partner in crime, and I serve ESUs 2, 3, and OPS. And I will pass it to Mary Jo.
Hey everybody, I'm Mary Jo Macahos. I am the Nebraska MTSS Literacy State Lead. So support across the state in the area of literacy and integrating literacy pieces into your systems. And I will pass it to Angie.
Thanks, Mary Jo. Good morning, everyone. I'm Angie Dickey, teaching and learning consultant at ESU 15 in Southwest Nebraska, and I also serve as the Region 5 reading literacy coach, serving ESU 13, 15, and 16. And so excited to get to present today.
Yes, we're excited that Angie is here helping us, and Mary Jo. We love their expertise in literacy. All right, so our welcoming inclusion activity, you can reflect and drop it in the chat. One word or short phrase that is a story, book, or conversation when one of those helped you feel understood or connected. Or you can choose a word that describes how you hope students feel when engaging in reading, writing, or discussion. You can also unmute since we have a small group, so feel free to unmute and share too.
I was just thinking, I was kind of thinking more on that second one, choose one word that describes how you hope students feel. I was thinking the word that they would belong, right? That they would feel like they belong and that they're all included in the conversations. And when we're looking at engaging in reading and writing and discussion, that they all feel like their voice can be heard.
Yes. Yes. I see confident in the chat. Yes, we want them to feel confident. We were talking about this kind of while we were creating the Coffee Connect, and we got into talking about the Matthew effect and how when students have a hard time reading, they tend to have more negative feelings and thoughts, and it just kind of spirals. And so wanting to get on the positive spiral of having those positive feelings and thoughts when reading. All right. This is not from the first five, but we just like to shout out the first five. If you click on that graphic or throughout the slide deck, if you see this little clicky image, that means there's something linked behind the image. And they have a lot of great resources for welcoming activities. All right, so we have our Padlet. This is the same Padlet for the entire year, but we put new resources in. And then each Coffee Connect, we make a specific Padlet after. So you can go back and look at any of the resources. So all of the resources and more that aren't in this Coffee Connect explicitly, that have anything to do with literacy skills within academic circles are linked in that Padlet. We'll put the link in the chat, and the password is capital MTSS. And you're also welcome to add anything you have. So if you have any good resources, we'd love to share resources and chat about what is happening. Ooh, we got a new one in the chat. Empowered, feeling empowered and seeing the importance of reading and writing as it's present in their whole life. Yes, thank you. All right, Nebraska MTSS are essential elements, infrastructure and shared leadership, that layered continuum of supports, database decision-making, communication, and collaboration. We always like to bring everything we do to the heart of the MTSS framework because it doesn't really matter what you do in your schools. If you're building on these essential elements in some capacity, you're going to be building your system. And with today, we're throughout the Coffee Connect series, we're tying in, integrating those restorative practices, and then we're really hitting on those academic literacy skills today. So we're really trying to integrate our systems as we're building, thinking of how we can support the whole child in their academics and in their social emotional behavior development. And this is our restorative practice continuum. So when we think of restorative practices, we're doing a lot of preventative work through informal, through our language, through how we're gathering. And then that responsive side is hopefully 20% or less of the time we're spending doing those restorative practices, repairing harm. But where we're sitting today is right about here with our circles. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how we can use the circle structure and also how we can tie in those theories behind restorative practices into literacy development. So we're thinking of how we're changing the way we're gathering and how we're targeting some of these literacy skills and these things that we're developing in our students through the use of circles and restorative practice. And this image is adapted from Allie Hearn, Coaching and Consulting. All right, I'm going to pass it on to Mary Jo.
Great, thanks, Mackenzie. So on this slide, we really wanted to start out by making some direct connections between, again, like Mackenzie said, the restorative practices circle structure and building strong literacy ability. So you see here in looking at key components of both of those areas, restorative practices and literacy, you see the science with the science of reading on the right side, that both of these really anchor to language development. In fact, in literacy, language is the bedrock to all reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So high quality restorative circles can help students build those oral language skills which are needed for reading comprehension. And so you can see improving communication skills, listening, perspective taking, empathy, all of those really what we think about as building those social emotional skills. By creating this environment or this structure in our classrooms to connect with academics, we can kind of strengthen, well, we will strengthen both of these key areas and around literacy development too. So I think probably a lot of us have seen Scarborough's reading rope if you are involved in reading in any way or building literacy. But if not, this what we know is that reading comprehension is built on both language and knowledge, right? So language is really the bedrock, but that bringing in that knowledge component is crucial too. And we know that reading is not just a single skill. It's the result of many language and word reading abilities working together over time. So this is the Scarborough's reading rope model, and it was developed by Hollis Scarborough in 2001. And it really just, again, illustrates how skilled reading develops as these strands of the rope become on the bottom foundational or word recognition part, they become increasingly automatic and tightly woven, leading overall to strong comprehension. For this session today, you see, as Mackenzie clicks here, we are focusing on the language comprehension or the upper strands of the rope, just to draw as a natural fit to the circle structure used in restorative practices. These restorative circle structures naturally strengthen the language comprehension strands of reading because they require students to collaboratively construct meaning through accountable talk. We can see their background knowledge at the very top. Students activate background knowledge as they connect to the text and shared experiences and prior learning. Vocabulary, they practice academic vocabulary by explaining and clarifying ideas aloud. Language structures, students are navigating language structures when they're listening to complex sentences and really digging in and forming their own responses. Verbal reasoning is developed through inferencing and justifying things, building on peers' thinking. So I think I'm just finishing up on the Scarborough's rope one still, sorry. So again, just knowing that in a circle, comprehension becomes really a social process. Students don't just extract meaning from a text, but they negotiate and refine the meaning together, which tightly weaves those upper strands of the rope. All right, now I think we're ready to move on to the next. So on this next one here, just a little bit deeper dive into how those upper strands work together. We know background knowledge, as you see there, really is fueling understanding. What students already know helps them to connect ideas and fill gaps and interpret new information. Vocabulary, as I mentioned, provides that access to meaning. If students don't know the words, they can't fully access the ideas. And then you see language structures, again, syntax, understanding the complexity of complex text, of deep level sentences, and students really unpack how those ideas hang together and relate. Verbal reasoning builds coherence. And again, students are inferencing and perspective taking and adding logic to connect ideas. Literacy knowledge guides expectations and understanding genres, different kinds of genres, knowing that, grappling with a narrative or looking at a narrative text is going to be very different than looking at an expository or informational text, and understanding how those different things are built out within the structure and how they're organized. And then, so really within strong literacy comprehension instruction, that context is created that allows for classroom discourse. So that's a word I wanted to introduce. Discourse refers to the purposeful, structured talk between students and teachers that deepens understanding of text through thinking, reasoning, meaning making, and really becomes a primary vehicle through which comprehension is built. So a classroom culture and environment that supports discourse is built on the same foundation we consider within restorative practices circle structures. So learning happens through respectful, accountable talk where every voice contributes to shared understanding. And so in this case, we're talking about shared understanding of a text, but we're also building, again, those same social emotional learning pieces as well as we go. Right. Then one more connection that I just wanted to highlight, we brought in the word discourse, which is really, again, that structure of meaning. Metacognition, which you see here in language comprehension, is really that thinking about thinking, or that awareness of thinking and navigating through that structure that's been established by discourse. This is what we're striving for, this deep cognitive thinking when we engage students in building comprehension. So I bolded a few words on this slide, again, to just tie many of those communication skills and social emotional learning skills that we want to all develop, and we want to definitely develop and help strengthen in our students. A circle structure is a great way to build these as we are building deep cognitive thinking skills as well. So you can kind of read through those, but when we really think about examining thinking processes and approaches used in order to identify different ways of solving a problem, that's really tying in those two pieces. Exploring diverse ways or strategies and really considering others' viewpoints and perspectives. Active listening, taking into account what others are saying and how that plays into forming meaning and building that respectful communication back and forth. And then how do we debate or negotiate our ideas to reach a consensus? So again, metacognition is a strong practice that we want to engage students in. And circles is a way that we can really enhance both of these areas. I think I'm turning it over to Amber.
Yes, thank you, Mary Jo. So, this is a quote that we found that really talks about how research shows that restorative practices is actually a very strong tool for academics, too. It's not just a behavioral resource where we can really build that community, but it has shown that it can improve test performance. When students are experiencing restorative practices daily in their instruction, really those components of relationship building, problem solving, and repairing harm, it doesn't just reduce suspensions, which is an amazing part of restorative practices, but it also improves student learning outcomes. What we see when students are engaging in restorative practices is they feel safer, connected, and supported, and they're more likely to engage in the actual instruction. And I think that's really important. And we get them to stay in class. We're not going to see them leaving class as much, dealing with behaviors and all of those components, but we're actually diving into how there's a deep relationship and we can problem solve through this. And the less time removed from the learning leads to stronger outcomes for our students. And the data reflects that we can see those improvements not only in English language arts, but mathematics as well. And I think that's really important to show that restorative practices is a great for all areas of instruction. So we're going to dive into a circle. So when you're thinking about what is a circle, okay, a circle is a structure and a way of gathering. So thinking about how we're bringing our class together. So when we're thinking about circles, um, it shapes its shape implies community, connection, inclusion, fairness, equality, and wholeness. So when we're meeting in a circle, it establishes a level playing field for all participants. Everyone gets the opportunity to participate. Everyone is seen in the circle. Nothing is hidden, which helps us build a sense of safety, trust, belonging. It really makes it an open space for everyone to be a part of. A circle has structure, purpose, and focus. So sometimes this might be a proactive or sometimes it's a responsive. And I think that's one thing to keep in mind is it can be both. By seeing everyone in the circle, it really opens that conversation to whatever it needs to be, whether it be personal, academic, or work related in large groups, small groups. You can really shape it in multiple different ways. You can use circle in a situation where you want people to be more connected, and it should be a fun way to connect and not just a time to talk about feelings or emotions and be all touchy-feely, because that's not always the case. There's definitely elements of that, and there's opportunities for those, but it's also a really fun opportunity where students can talk about their own experiences and really get their voice heard and get to share their own ideas in a very safe and trusting and belonging environment. When we use circles, first and foremost, we want to establish strong, supportive relationships among all of the students. When we have that really great foundation of circles, it can have a significant academic impact in the long run. So when we think about how we're going to establish that early on, we really encourage that everyone can look at each other in the eye and be able to see one another. Students get equal time and attention from the instructor and from their peers. They are able to really build that trust with one another and feel safe. And everyone has a role to play. So it's very important that we think about it as every single person has an impact when they're in a circle. We facilitate a circle rather than just a lecture. So I think that's one thing that's really important is it helps everyone have that shared leadership and ownership. And as we know, having that ownership of their learning is going to promote better student outcomes. When we're thinking about literacy in general and really thinking about gathering in a circle and having students have the opportunity to discuss literacy, it supports it in a very low pressured environment. So we don't have to worry about it being really high pressured and feeling like they're being told what to do or there's a right or wrong answer. It's really promoting that discussion. So these circles give the students an opportunity to talk about reading and writing in a collaborative setting. So they're really able to think through all the ways that they can work together to embrace literacy. this can be from a wide range of things. It can include choosing books. So when you think about when we're trying to build a love of literature in our classrooms, we can think about how they can explore different books that other students have read or talk about their reading. And that's going to promote comprehension and that language components as well. So it's a double whammy, if you will, and a good thing for both. It also, we can talk about exploring vocabulary and word meanings so we can hear one another talking about it. Um, and when we think about students can talk through author's purpose and ways that they can prepare for reading and writing tasks. So sometimes coming up with the new ideas is so challenging for our students, but when they're able to hear one another and build that deeper understanding and hear other perspectives, they're able to have deeper comprehension with things that they might write about. One thing that I want to point out is we are talking a lot about the top part of the reading rope, but there is a place for the bottom part of the reading rope as well in restorative practices. So when we're thinking about a word focused circle, specifically in like K2 settings, we can think about our phono phonological awareness and our word recognition and how that can be embraced through talk. So some ways that we can do this is saying things like, say a word that rhymes with cat, or a sound you hear at the end of the word jump, or a word you notice again and again in our story, and having those conversations about those and being able to hear one of those. I mean, that can even turn into a game really quickly about thinking about rhyming words and building the phonological awareness and what sounds. And there's so many different elements that you can include circle for that part as well. And it's especially powerful for students that have dyslexia or language delays or are English learners because it's, again, low pressure with that high repetition in a safe environment where they're with their peers. And they get to hear the right answer again and again, and they get to hear it from leaders in their classroom, which just continues to promote how they can embrace it in their own learning. There's also the component that for many students, reading can be really challenging and can carry a lot of negative feelings about reading and or writing. I know writing can carry a lot of hard feelings and they don't feel like they're able to really be able to discuss their writing, but circling up can be really validating for those students. It shifts literacy from being something that someone struggles with alone to something that they can explore together and learn from one another. And it points out that, we may struggle through this, but we can work through it together as well. It's not an individual targeted thing. It's something that we can work through together. And when we think about why this really matters for MTSS, it reduces that language anxiety that might be embedded in these students. So if they're nervous to talk in front of large groups, when you're promoting that again and again, they're able to have less anxiety about speaking in front of another, and it increases that talk time for all students. So there's way more opportunities to respond, and you're able to get a wide variety of students. They build comprehension before print demands. So when you're having those conversations, even if students really struggle with the decoding and knowing the code, they're able to leverage their language comprehension and be able to talk about their different comprehension skills, what they found in a text, how they relate to a text, and really builds that deeper level thinking that we need for reading. And it supports Tier 1 literacy for every student. So we're really thinking about how every student is benefiting from it and not just individual students. Another great thing about academic circles is we can tie it right into the Nebraska state standards, which is perfect. That's exactly what we hope for, right? We can help support students achieve a higher standard proficiency at a higher level. So we're not only taking it and building a great environment and a great foundation for learning, but we're also pushing it to a deeper level. So academic circles are very intentional and they can connect to restorative practices and the academics standards. So it's a great bridge to bring them both together. It isn't separate from instruction. It truly is the instruction. You're thinking about how you're bringing students together, how you're building in opportunities to participate and respond to all different layers of thinking, right? And at every individual level, there's an opportunity to talk about academics in a circle capacity. So for example, when we're looking at the Nebraska state standards that are linked here, one of the state standards is State Standard 5. And you can use State Standard 5, which talks about characters, actions, conflicts, inferences, themes, all of those in standard 6, you can use either one of those standards and talk about them directly in circle. Okay, so when you're thinking about the characters' motivations and conflicts, they're practicing those comprehension skills. When they're discussing inferences, themes, or deeper meaning in text, they're building the skills required that are needed to in order to do that, right? And that can be at any level because we do have to practice those. And the standards that are linked here, you will see it through K-12. So there's opportunity for that in all of them because we do have to build that language component at every single level of the reading rope. Circle, when they practice this, it really becomes a strategy for improving student outcomes and the classroom community. So you get kind of both of those double whammy, and kids get a lot more out of it. Some other ways that we can think about some easy entry points for academic circles. So when you're thinking about, okay, well, where do I really get this started? How might I be able to build this into my instruction? You can think about character discussion. That's a really good entry point for all levels. Characters give students a safe way to explore their feelings, their choices, consequences, without immediately making it personal. So if you potentially a student is struggling with the sharing of a really personal thing or in circle, you can do it talking about characters first so that they can get an outside perspective. So that's going to help build comprehension and build a safer environment. They can really think through real life issues. And when they think about a character and how they acted a certain way, what emotions they're feeling, what choices they could have made differently, it builds that critical thinking that we need for literacy, but it also builds that critical thinking we need for everyday life and thinking about how we can develop deeper empathy for one another and understand why people make the decisions that they make. Conflict is another great entry point. So it's a way that you can have a discussion that students can really relate to, right? When we're thinking about literature and good themes that are being pulled out of literature, there is a lot that students can relate to. You can think about how they're handling interpersonal conflict or moral dilemmas in literacy, and it creates that opportunity to connect to a story in real life situations. When we think about our peer conflict, decision making, problem solving, all of those components, we can really build that into our discussions for literacy. And we can have stories, reflections, and talk about real life. And that becomes so integral in reading and writing instead of separate from them. When they're able to have that deeper comprehension and relate it to themselves, they're getting to that deepest layer of comprehension while building those interpersonal skills. And children and teachers don't just read and write text, but they're building meaning together. And I think that's really the impactful part of it. They can use that language collaboratively, honoring each other's strengths and experiences, and really think of ways to make sense of text. And I think that's really shows that academic circles are for literature, and they help promote that environment and how you're building it in your classroom. So when we're thinking about what this might look like throughout a lesson and where would be entry points throughout a lesson that you might already be building, it's a really practical instructional tool that teachers can pull out to ensure that they're getting more opportunities to respond, deeper connection. And this image that is attached here is from Circle Forward, Building Restorative School Community. So it breaks down each step in a lesson where you can talk about where you can use circles as a form of instruction, and it can be a strategy that you can implement anytime. So it doesn't have to be something that you use for an entire lesson. It doesn't have to be something that you use just once. There's many different entry points throughout a lesson where you can embed circles as a strategy. So for example, when we're thinking about activating background knowledge, which we know is very critical when it comes to reading comprehension in that upper strand of the reading rope, we can gather in circle to think about what students already know about a unit, which really helps us think about what learning do we have to learn and what do we already possess to really leverage what students already know. We can use it as a check for understanding. So when we're thinking about when we've gone through the different components of a lesson, we can build that for check for understanding. And these can be used more than just literacy, but a literacy is what we're talking about today, but this can be used in multiple different settings. We can also think about it's great for building that vocabulary as we talked about earlier. So we're thinking about how students are able to use vocabulary in different settings and where they're able to practice new words and hear others use it and be vulnerable, but also be able to hear like how their peers use it instead of just hearing it from the adult. And I think that can be a really great way to embed it into the instruction and for them to understand how they use it. There's also a read around that you can use as a strategy. And when we think about read around reflection circles, it's really strengthening that comprehension through that shared meaning again. So it's where teachers can share a short text, a poem, a passage, and give the students a circle prompt to really think about as they're reading through the text, and then use a talking piece that we know is critical in a circle to ensure equitable voices among the entire group so everyone gets that opportunity to share their thoughts. And I mean, there can be questions like, what part stood out to you and why? What did the character learn that we can learn too? What word or phrase helped you understand the meaning of that word? There's so many different ways that you can embed this when you're thinking about reading aloud from a teacher's perspective or when students are sharing their own writing. So when we're thinking about when students are using their own writing, they're really able to share what they've written, what they're proud of. This can be in a small capacity, in a large capacity. There's multiple options where, again, we can build that love for writing. And this really builds into your rope connections, thinking about background knowledge, vocabulary, literacy knowledge, verbal reasoning. It's all the components of structured literacy that we truly need. And it's not just a worksheet, right? We're not just giving them write an answer of how to do this, but really embedding it into our language and our daily conversations. Reflection circles can really be helpful because they're part of that learning process and it can build that metacognition that we were talking about earlier. When we're using storybooks to teach values, it's an excellent way to connect literacy and that social emotional learning because you can explore those themes like respect, perseverance, kindness, fairness, and responsibility through a text discussion. So you're able to really access many different parts. So as you can see, there's just a ton of different ways that you can embed literacy into your circles or circles into your instruction, or there's many different entry points and many different ways that you can think through how that might look in your instruction. And I am going to pass it to Jill.
Perfect. Thanks, Amber. Such great connections with restorative practices and literacy and within those circles. We also know if you guys have been through any of our foundational restorative practices training series that there's so much more to restorative practices. Circles are, one great practice of it. But we can also really think about some of the different theories that we talk about in the foundational series. One of them being the social discipline window. And we can really start to make some connections as we think about literacy and how our students learn with that reading, that writing. Honestly, just like Amber was saying, with any of the academics, how we can relate that social discipline window here as well. So we could honestly spend a good amount of time really talking through, if you're not familiar with what the social discipline window is, we could spend a lot of time going through each of those panes of the window. So we're just going to kind of do just a brief little overview, try to make some connections, but it's a great point to bring up here too, that we have lots of foundational restorative practices trainings across the state. So if you're interested, in attending any of those, reach out. We can send you the flyers and the registration information. But as you see here, so this graphic here, we have what you could see as a window, right? And we have the panes of the window. So you'll see 2 and not and with and for. And then you also see some vertical, going vertically and horizontally. And as you go up, you see that level of control. So as we move from lower to higher, there's more of that control piece. So can be good or bad, right? Like thinking about setting those limits, thinking about setting those expectations, all important pieces. Setting that structure. As you see horizontally, we have that arrow with level of support. And as we move from lower to higher, we're thinking about more nurture, right? More love, more care, more concern, more of that encouragement piece. So as you take a look at kind of each one of those boxes, we can move up for that level of control and then across, so lower to higher for that level of support. So just to kind of give you an idea of what that social discipline window is. You'll also see here in this graphic where it just kind of gives a little description of what that doing to means, what that doing not means, what doing for means, and what doing with means. And we're going to go through just a couple examples just to kind of make some connections there as well. But you'll see within this graphic here, so doing to, that's going to be more of that kind of what we'd think about as more punitive. So more maybe confronting, more of kind of like a win-lose for the doing not. So more neglectful is how we might describe this one. Maybe kind of just given up, more of the lazy side. The four we may describe as being more permissive, maybe like rescuing or excusing or making excuses. And then up at the top there, the one with the heart, doing with really kind of what we want to move towards. So doing with students, doing with our staff, that's more of that restorative side. So really bringing in the problem solving, really thinking about that responsive and how we're responding, and respectful. So we have that high level of support. So lots of nurturing, lots of encouragement, lots of care, lots of concern. But we also have that higher level of control as well. So we're setting those expectations. We have that structure in place. We've set those limits. So just to kind of give you an idea when we say that social discipline window, kind of what that means. If we go on to this next piece, we've tried to kind of outline each of those panes of the social discipline window and kind of starting to make some connections with when we're thinking about specifically literacy, but quite honestly, again, all academics, right? So here we've highlighted some information from a restorative literacies article, which we do have linked at the bottom of this slide if you're interested in reading through that. Lots of great information and some connections to that social discipline window as well. But within that doing to pane, so that top one, the orange one there, we have assessments and grading policies and procedures noted there. So thinking about how that might relate to that doing to. So in the article, they discuss a lot how some students can really experience, working on their reading, their writing skills as very difficult, just as Amber was saying. It can be stressful. It can bring some anxiety, right? They can see it maybe as more of a punitive process. Even when we think about those assessments as well, they can be a blessing, right? Can give us lots of great information, but they can also be a bane as well. And so really thinking about when we can feel pride, right? If we do well on an assessment or do well on a paper that we just turned in, it can help us feel successful. We might feel excited because we're leveling up, or we just passed, or we aced a test, or we moved up in that percentile rank, right? But like I mentioned, it can also bring some anxiety, right? When maybe we're facing some unfamiliar words or phrases or an assignment or an assessment. So really thinking about those pieces. Grading and grading procedures, when we think about those, it's typically kind of like a top-down process, right? From teacher to student. And that feedback is typically just kind of aligned with whatever grade we might receive. So there may not be a lot of additional feedback outside of the grade that they received. And so we're really interpreting, and that is the feedback that we're needing to interpret based on the grade that we're receiving. So, how might we kind of think outside the box here? How might we kind of start to bring in some other types of feedback with those grading procedures? And I know you may, be doing a lot of this already, but just an important piece to kind of think about here so we can start to move out of that doing to and moving more with that doing with. So, how can we provide maybe opportunities for revisions? How can we provide more of that student voice and choice within our assessments, maybe within our grading procedures? How might we use rubrics? How might we have more responsive and interactive teacher to student conversations? So really thinking about some of those pieces because as we highlighted here, it's important to think about our learning, right? Our literacy, our reading, our writing skills really holistically. And we have to really think about our student strengths, our student challenges, and how we can leverage those strengths and build upon those challenges. In the doing not box, you see learning to not see. So focusing more, how can we move to having that awareness and that being able to respond to the different experiences of our students, to the different backgrounds of our students, and really thinking about inclusivity. In the doing for, you'll see lower expectations there. And so, really starting to think about when we're operating out of the doing for pain, are we truly listening? Maybe we're lowering our expectations if we're operating out of that doing for. We might be denying students of access to different opportunities and being able to really participate fully and differently. So just to kind of give us an idea of each of those different panes of the social discipline window and what might be happening if we're operating out of one of those. The doing with, we have just a few points to kind of outline with that doing with. So here you will see that really we want to try to get to that window pane, right? That's kind of our ultimate goal. It's obviously not fatal if we're operating out of some of those non-with windows. We all do it, we're all human, but it can be fatal if we really start to live in one of those panes. So how can we really start to move to that doing with window pane? And this just highlights here some of those. Really having those high expectations, having those high standards of behavior, but also having those high levels of support for our students, helping to meet their needs, helping to really use those teachable moments. And so, as you see here, so really helping to learn how to notice and listen what's happening maybe behind those behaviors, behind that silence, behind that disengagement, and really working to scaffold and practice together, right? Really thinking about those reading and writing skills and how we can leverage that student voice and choice, how we can use some of those strategies, even thinking about how we might do some of that within Circle as well, like Amber was talking about earlier. So just some nice pieces to really think about that social discipline window, starting to make some of those connections with each of those panes. And then we just wanted to share this nice quote here. We love this quote as it really kind of highlights the social discipline window and really advocating for that doing with approach. So that high level of support, that high challenge. And so while all four areas are observable in schools, there is much doing to, but doing with is most necessary to strengthen reading and writing skills and to develop a strong sense of identity and literacy. So we wanted to leave you with that because it connects so well with that social discipline window. And I'm going to pass it on to Angie to make some more connections.
Thank you, Jill. When we talk about the Nebraska ELA and Foundational Skills Instructional Practice Guide, known as the IPGs, we're really talking about what high quality Tier 1 instruction looks like in action. The IPG describes classrooms where students are thinking deeply, discussing ideas, and explaining their reasoning and engaging with high grade level text. They describe intellectual engagement, not just compliance. And I think compliance is an important word because when we walk into classrooms, kids that are well behaved sometimes are just being compliant, but they're not really doing actual learning. But here's something important. The kind of classroom doesn't happen unless students feel safe enough to participate. And that's where restorative practices comes in. Restorative practices aren't separate from instruction. They create the condition that allows the IPGs to come alive. When we talk about the Nebraska ELA and foundational skills instructional practice guides, the IPGs we're really talking about is what Tier 1 instruction looks like in action. On one of the strongest indicators in the IPG is student discourse. Students explaining their thinking, students building on one another's ideas, students engaging in meaningful academic talk. But meaning academic talk requires trust. If a student is worried about being embarrassed, or if they're unsure whether their idea will be respected, or if only the same 3 students ever speak, then we don't really have intellectual engagement. Restorative practices intentionally build norms around listening, respect, and shared responsibilities. In these spaces, disagreement becomes inquiry instead of conflict. Students learn to respond to others, not attack people. So when we see strong discourse aligned to the IPGs, what we're often seeing underneath is a restorative culture. Another strong IPG focus is student voice and meaning making. The IPGs ask students to connect text with their experiences, to analyze perspective, to maximize theme, to engage with complex ideas. Restorative practices reinforce the belief that students' experiences matter. That's their story, they have value. That multiple perspective can exist in the same room. When a teacher opens a lesson with a short circle question connected to a theme, identify fairness, belonging, students are already activating thinking before they ever begin close reading. That's not extra, that's building the schema and engagement the IPGs call for. There's also a foundational skills connection here. The foundational skills IPG emphasizes vocabulary, oral language, and opportunities for students to explain and process their thinking. Language develops socially. When students talk about new vocabulary, negotiate meaning, use sentence frames, and hear others model academic language, that's restorative in nature. It's collaborative, it's interactive, it's shared. Restorative spaces normalize making mistakes as part of learning. That matters tremendously in literacy development. And finally, there's the equity piece. The IPGs call for all students to be engaged, not just for the confident ones. Restorative practice help ensures that every student has airtime, that classroom dialogue isn't dominated by a few voices, that teachers are attentive to who speaks and who doesn't. In that way, restorative practice becomes an equity level for implementing the IPGs with fidelity. So if we step back and zoom out, the IPGs describe the instructional moves. Restorative practices create the relational foundation that makes these moves effective. This isn't about adding something else. It's about recognizing that high ability literacy instruction and restorative culture are deeply connected. When students feel safe, seen, and heard, they engage. When they engage, they comprehend, and that's the heart of Tier 1. When we look at this visual with self-awareness, self-management, pro-social behavior, relationships, and responsible decision-making, we're really looking at the foundation for learning. These social emotional competencies are not separate from literacy. They make literacy possible. In restorative classrooms, students practice self-awareness through reflection and dialogue. When students can name their thoughts and emotions, they are better able to monitor their comprehension, persist through challenging texts, and take academic risks. Self-management shows up in literacy when students set goals for reading, sustain attention during complex tasks, and use strategies when meaning breaks down. Restorative routines shift students from compliance to ownership, which strengthens stamina and engagement with grade level text. Pro-social behavior and relationship skills are directly connected to the kind of discourse the instructional practice guides call for. When students engage in collaborative conversations, build on one another's ideas, and listen to understanding, they are developing both empathy and language. That oral language development is a critical driver of vocabulary, comprehension, and most importantly, writing. And when restorative practices responsible decision making, they learn to analyze perspectives, evaluate impact, and justify their thinking. Skills that transfer directly to reading comprehension and written argument. So, this slide isn't just about behavior or climate, it's about building the conditions for strong Tier 1 literacy instruction. In Nebraska MTSS, when these competencies are embedded in daily classroom routines, we see higher engagement, stronger discourse, and greater access to grade level text for all students. Belonging supports behavior, belonging supports literacy, and restorative practices help us build both. When thinking about your Tier 1 classrooms, how are your students practicing the social restorative skills that make academic discourse and therefore possible and literacy possible? When literacy is a natural bridge between restorative practices and literacy. When students discuss a character's conflict, choice, and impact, they're practicing restorative thinking, examining perspective, empathy, and what repair could look like. At the same time, they're doing the exact work the Nebraska instructional practice guides call for, analyzing theme, using evidence, building vocabulary, and engaging in academic discourse. Stories give students a safe way to talk about real issues without putting anyone on the spot. That increases belonging, and when students feel safe to speak and listen, their language grows, and language drives comprehension. From a Nebraska Tier 1 lens, this means higher engagements for all students, stronger discussion, and deeper access to grade level texts. Literacy becomes more than something we analyze, it becomes a shared experience that builds community and literacy at the same time. In an elementary classroom, when reading about kindness, the teacher pauses after the story and asks students to sit in a short circle. Students discuss what happened to the character, who was affected, what could have been done differently. As students share, they identify theme, using story details as evidence and building vocabulary like kindness, exclusion, and impact. At the same time, they're practicing empathy, perspective taking, and collaborative problem solving. That's restorative dialogue and literacy happening together in Tier 1 instruction. In a secondary classroom, if you were reading A Raisin in the Sun, students analyze a conflict between characters and then participate in a structured discussion. They consider, what does each character want? What do their choices How do their choices affect others, and what would repair look like? Students cite lines from the text to support their thinking, respond to peers, and examine multiple perspectives. They're practicing argument and analysis and academic language, while also engaging in restorative reflection about impact and responsibility. That's deep comprehension and restorative thinking at the same time. How might a shared text in your classroom become a space for students to practice both academic discourse and restorative dialogue? This is how restorative practices, literacy, and Nebraska MTSS align to one coherent Tier 1 experience for every student. As we close this section, this slide brings us back to the Nebraska ELA standards and the central role of language in learning. Strategies like dialogic reading and the peer crowd framework build vocabulary, oral language, and comprehension by intentionally engaging students in conversation around text. Students aren't just listening to a read aloud, they're prompting, responding, expanding, and connecting ideas. The same structure mirrors restorative practice using academic circles. When we use circles, open discussion, role play, and storytelling, students are learning how to listen, take perspective, and navigate social dynamics. But what makes the difference is adult modeling and intentionality. Teachers guide language, model respectful dialogue, and create space for repair and reflection. This builds background knowledge and strengthens students' ability to pull evidence, identify theme, and consider multiple perspectives, skills named in the Nebraska ELA standards. And just as important, shared reading experiences build relationships. Students learn from books and they learn from one another. So, language read aloud and relationships are not separate from literacy. They are the pathway to deeper comprehension, stronger community, and effective Tier 1 instruction within Nebraska MTSS. You will find these resources in the Padlet with stories connecting to social emotional areas by grade bands that will provide you a great starting point. So with that, I'm turning it over to Mackenzie.
Awesome. Thank you, Angie. I get to just close us out with some resources and reminders. So this slide here just has a couple of things if you want to dive deeper into this topic of restorative literacies or literacy within your classroom using restorative practices. So the one on the left, restorative literacy practices, cultivating community in the secondary ELA classroom. Great resource, especially for secondary folks out there. The middle one is Restorative Literacies by Deborah Wolter. I actually read this one in preparation for the Coffee Connect, and it does a really nice job explaining how literacy isn't something that really happens in a silo, but you have to bring your whole self, your identity, your experiences, your background knowledge. We all have so much, all of our students have so much that they bring with them into the classroom. So how are we leveraging our knowledge and our skills and our strengths and our struggles to bring them together to create that culture of learning in our classrooms to really leverage the strengths, but also help students realize they're not alone in the challenges when they're learning to read, especially if it's difficult for them. And then the one on the top right is training that's being offered by the International Institute for Restorative Practices. It's called Connection and Content, Integrating Restorative Practices into Classroom Learning. It's a virtual learning opportunity that looks like it'd be really good if you're really diving into restorative practices and you want to learn how you can better leverage these practices in your classroom environment. So they're all linked in behind the images if you want to look a little bit further. Our next Coffee Connect is on May 13th. So in the spring, maybe summer, depending on what the weather's deciding to do. Feedback fuels growth is our topic, and we're going to target providing feedback to students and really tie in those affective language pieces. So talking about using affective questions to provide good reflection, but also using affective statements to provide really strong feedback that prompts reflection and identifying impact and all the things. So tune in for May. We're excited to do that. We do have an exit survey. We would love if you could take that to give us some feedback, or if you have any topic ideas for next year. I'm sure we'll start planning soon. So you can scan that code. We'll drop the exit survey in the chat here soon. And if you need a certificate of attendance for today, just send us an email and we'll make sure to get one for you. And then our last Coffee Connect for the year is actually at the beginning of next year, August 19th. We'll wrap up this restorative practice series of Coffee Connect. And in that one, we will talk about holding high expectations and doing with students. So targeting that social discipline window a little bit more and really talking about having high expectations for all learners, striving learners who are continuously getting better. They deserve to be held to those same high expectations as our students who are high performing. So we will touch on that in August in the start of the school year. This is maybe the first time we've shared this graphic because it was shared with us yesterday. We do have a theme for our Nebraska MTSS Summit, which is happening in October in Kearney. Destination impact, turning MTSS systems into literacy-driven student outcomes. So we'd love to see you in Kearney, and there's more information. Proposals are going to be starting to be collected here soon. So if you have good stories of what you've done in your school or your district, we would love to hear from you in those school spotlights. Those are always a popular thing in our summit. And another save the date reminder, the Nebraska State Literacy Association is having their Summer Institute on Friday, June 12th in Kearney, also at the Eunice Conference Center North. And they have a theme of elevating Nebraska literacy. It takes all of us, from foundational literacy to secondary instruction, building evidence-based systems that support every reader and writer. So I think they have some good speakers lined up, specifically some speakers around secondary literacy. So if you're in that secondary realm, this would be a great opportunity for you to join. We have our universal trainings focused more on those social emotional behavioral systems building. And we have those trainings happening throughout this semester. We're doing more of those tier 2, tier 3 training supports, but then in the summer, we will start over at tier 1. So every Monday in June, if you are wanting to build your systems, you can do these trainings. They're free on Zoom for anyone who wants to join. And we'll just close together with our optimistic closure. How might you use a story or text to help a student better understand their impact on others? What is one small step you can take in the next week to use literacy as a tool for connection or repairing harm in your classroom? Or what is a new perspective you gained today that you're excited to share with a colleague or a student? You can drop those in the chat. You can self-reflect. We hope that you came today and you learned a little bit more, either about literacy or restorative practices, or you were just reminded of how you can really, truly integrate these together and within your system. Thank you all for joining us today. You can always reach out to us if you have questions or if you want to further anything that you learned today. We'd love to be a thought partner or help with any of your system needs. Thanks all for joining us.